You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 11th of October 2013. Chigwell paedophile handed suspended sentence by Judge Greenwood. MI5 chief warns British public of terror threat. Terrorism is no longer over there, it's here. Italy, over 3/5 of families cut food spending in January to June. Italy is set to pass EU migrant directive to meet European Union's Directive 51. French farmers committing suicide every 2 days. 3 million Spaniards now live in dire poverty, says Caritas. Nick Griffin MEP, who today talks about the EDL and more. Syria rebels execute a civilian, says Human Rights Watch. From Egypt the message is Obama, keep your aid. Thought for the day, our Utes and the great cultural divide. And finally, a fond remembrance or the eternal flame. UK news. Chigwell paedophile handed suspended sentence by Judge Greenwood. A paedophile convicted of repeated sexual activity with a child has walked free from court. Simeon Osen, 52, of Forest Lane in Chigwell, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl aged between 13 and 17, 3 counts of making indecent images of a child and 2 counts of possessing extreme pornography. All offences took place between September 2010 and February this year. Judge Greenwood handed Osen an 8-month suspended sentence on Monday this week at Harrow Crown Court. World at 8 comments. Osen is from the Jewish community and all are up in arms over the non-existent sentence. The day after the sentencing, another convicted paedophile, Neil Wilson, who had pleaded guilty to similar charges to Osen, had his sentence changed by the Attorney General from a suspended sentence to a 2-year jail sentence. The victim's aunt said, "The change in Neil Wilson's sentence has given us hope. We're going to look into the process that was used in his case to see if anything can be done." MI5 chief warns British public of terror threat. New intelligence agency boss says thousands of Islamic extremists see the British public as a legitimate target. Making his first speech as the head of Britain's intelligence agency, MI5, Andrew Parker said there are thousands of Islamic extremists living in the UK who see the British public as a valid target for attack. According to a BBC report, the new head of MI5 also said Islamic terror had become more complicated to track than ever before. It remains the case that there are several thousand Islamist terrorists here who see the British public as a legitimate target, Parker was quoted as telling a London gathering. World at 8 says, "We in the BNP told them this years ago. Perhaps we should all get jobs as consultants on the terror threat. It's going to happen very soon that they start killing us again, and moreover their reasons will be accepted by the vast majority of sheeples and even the victims' families." Terrorism is no longer over there, it's here. Terrorism is no longer over there, it's here, according to a security expert. Dr Sally Leavesley told ITV's Daybreak terrorists were frequently fighting abroad in countries like Syria and Afghanistan, learning the trade and then returning to England. Dr Leavesley was speaking after the head of MI5, Andrew Parker, went on a blistering attack against Edward Snowden and The Guardian for exposing America and Britain's mass surveillance programme. It's quite interesting because Parker, talks about why we have to live without fear, and it's why he tries to dull down the statements that he is making, because he is really telling us we have to expect this. But he is also saying that it is so unpredictable that they can't tell if they're going to be successful against these attacks. European news. Italy, over 3/5 of families cut food spending in January to June. A total of 62% of families in recession-hit Italy slashed their food spending in the first half of the year, and over 6.5 million families shopped in discount supermarkets to make ends meet, according to data compiled by the Italian Agricultural Producers Confederation. Food expenditure fell to 1.8% in Italy from January to June, and household spending declined 1.7% over the period as the 2-year-long recession dragged on. Today the food Italians are eating is strictly low cost, the Confederation said. Households have cut the quality as well as the quantity of what they eat, it's noted. It's urged a cut to VAT sales tax, which the government raised to 22% this month. in order to reverse crumbling Italian consumer demand. The recent VAT hike will cost households €200 to €300 each annually, according to the Confederation. Italy is set to pass EU migrant directive to meet European Union's Directive 51. Governments say migrants will have longer-term protections. Some migrants, such as the survivors of last week's shipwreck off the Italian coast, will be granted longer-term residency permits and will let them work and study in Europe, the Cabinet said in unveiling a decree Wednesday. The decree meets the European Union's Directive 51. Italy faced infraction proceedings because it had not enacted the directive. The decree allows greater freedom and protection for the 155 survivors of last Thursday's migrant boat disaster. The permit also gives the survivors mobility rights within the European Union so they can study or seek work in countries beyond Italy. The survivors have been facing formal investigation as undocumented migrants, a criminal offence under Italian law. World at 8 states. I'm sorry, but I cannot make hypocritical noises over this one. Despite the deaths, these people know the risks they take, and now the EU is waving a green flag to all the would-be migrants taking these risks and handing them benefits on a platter, when in fact the survivors should all be deported back. French farmers committing suicide every 2 days. French farmers are committing suicide every 2 days, according to the first official survey on this issue released Thursday. Carried out by the National Institute for Health Control, the survey logged 500 suicides amongst farmers during 2007 to 2009, equal to an average of 166 suicides a year. Of these, 417 men and 68 women, aged 45 to 64, most of them dairy and cattle farmers, took their own lives. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in the French agricultural world after cancer and cardiovascular disease. 3 main issues drive farmers to take their own lives, said expert Marie-Thérèse Denieux. These are increasing social isolation, the economic crisis and an increase in government inspections and administrative burdens. French Agricultural Minister Stéphane Le Foll said that he is aware that the financial difficulties being experienced by some farmers can create situations of distress. He promised to take determined action to respond to this scourge. World at 8 states. If the EU and the French and British governments paid as much attention to their own farmers and fishermen as they do a handful of dead boat people, Europe would be in a better state of self-provision for its people. Enough said. 3 million Spaniards now live in dire poverty, says Caritas. Catholic Charity talks of people left in dark as Spain finally emerges from tunnel of recession. After 5 years of crisis, more than 3 million Spaniards are now living in dire poverty, as defined by monthly income of under €307, according to a report by charity organisation Caritas. Caritas' Living Conditions Survey, which is included in the organisation's Social Reality Observatory for 2012, shows that the percentage of the population now living below the breadline has almost doubled from 3.5% in 2007 to 6.4% last year. Belly of the Beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, who talks today about the EDL defections and more.
I'm recording this for you while travelling home from Strasbourg, which was in turn en route back from Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. The country sits on the edge of the Caspian Sea, between Turkey to the east, Russia to the north, and Iran to the south. It's a major oil and gas producer and, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has been using its petrodollars in an ambitious modernisation programme. The people speak a Turkic language and are mainly Shia Muslims, for whom secular democracy on the 20th century Turkish model is clearly more important than religion. The local beer isn't bad, and in 2 days there I didn't see a single burqa or niqab. In truth, I saw more Islamism in Blackpool on our conference weekend than in 2 days in Baku. So what was I doing there? Election monitoring. It was presidential election day on Wednesday, and I spent it touring polling stations, watching how the whole process was run, and talking to officials and the activists of the various parties, including several outspoken members of the opposition. There were 10 candidates, although to be honest, only the president, the son of the man who most Azeris regard as the father of their modern state, and the opposition National Council were ever in the running. Once again, though, I watched as yet another supposedly somewhat totalitarian state delivered an election which was several times more democratic, more transparent, more fraud-proof and more honest than the sorry farce we have foisted on us every time in Britain. The British government could put right the worst of the corruption of UK democracy with a few very simple measures. To guarantee all parties equal access to broadcast media during the campaign, tie voter registration to national insurance numbers, insist on voters bringing photo ID to the polls, restore the postal vote as something only for the very sick and the very old, have election officials drawn from a cross-section of locally active parties rather than appointed by the clique that runs the local council, have the serial numbers on ballot papers cut off as they're issued to voters so that the ballot is genuinely secret, install webcams covering the issue of ballot papers and the ballot boxes themselves in all polling stations, use only secure tamper-proof ballot boxes, make it illegal to store uncounted ballot papers overnight, and give party representatives the right to stand near ballot papers at all stages of the count, rather than only in stages 1 and 2, as is the case in Britain at present. The length of that non-exhaustive list, by the way, should give you some idea of just how bad the UK system is, especially when you consider that every one of the radical proposals I've just put forward is already how they work in Azerbaijan. Incidentally, the president won by a landslide. He's the genuinely popular son of a revered father, and even the OSCE monitoring team, who were desperate to cast aspersions on the victory of an ally President Putin, had to admit that the result was genuine. I hope to be able to get a team of experienced monitors to come to Britain in a forthcoming election and see for themselves and report on just how rotten the present system really is, and thus to begin to provide the pressure that's needed to change it. That's one of the reasons I, from time to time, take part in monitoring elections in these faraway places. In the meantime, all I can say is that the techniques we developed in the British National Party in recent years, particularly voter registration and postal vote drives, coupled with attending postal vote opening sessions and putting our own seals on ballot boxes, do overcome the most blatant abuses of the system by corrupt Labour councils. The electoral process is still open to us, and we can still win. But it's only going to produce victories if these techniques are applied with iron discipline and relentless grassroots activism. While in Baku, I did get to see the lovingly restored, pre-Islamic, fire worship temple complex, which was built by ancient Hindus or Zoroastrians in the long-gone days when, as 3 separate locals told me, quote, "We hadn't been forced by the Arabs to become Muslims, and when most of our people still had blonde hair and blue eyes," unquote. The complex, the only one of its kind anywhere in the world, was built around 7 eternal flames, stone outcrops where natural gas came to the surface without any human intervention and caught fire untold centuries ago. The Soviets took so much of the gas that the flames went out in 1969, but today they're powered by gas piped from one of the nearby boreholes that's still in operation. It's a good job this fantastic piece of world heritage isn't in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan or Afghanistan, or some gang of Wahhabi crackpots would blow it up like they did those magnificent statues of the Buddha. As I found in Syria, a visit to a predominantly Shia country really highlights the extent to which the root of Britain's massive Muslim problem is the harsh, desert Salafist fundamentalism being promoted not by a handful of isolated extremists, as Tommy Robinson is now trying to tell us, but by millions of pounds being poured every year into many hundreds of mosques and madrasas in occupied parts of Britain by the Wahhabi fanatic allies of David Cameron and co. from Saudi Arabia and its fellow Gulf oil dictatorships. Of course, those same states are also pouring money into profitable big business deals and politicians' Swiss bank accounts in Britain, Europe and the USA, a fact which gives them political clout that's beginning to rival that of their Zionist allies on the extreme right of Israeli politics. Which brings me, of course, to this week's news of Tommy Robinson's move from the Zionist-run English Defence League to the neocon-linked Quilliam Foundation. People who have asked, how's Tommy been turned, are missing the point. Tommy hasn't been turned or bought. His masters have simply given their puppets a new dance routine. The facts about the Robinson EDL's creation by US-based neocons and their UK-based employees are all set out in our study, What Lies Behind the English Defence League, so I won't repeat them here. While it's several pages long, it's well laid out and quite easy to read. In fact, if you haven't yet read it, if you have time, you should at least skim through it when you've finished listening to this. But given all the effort these people made to create and manipulate the EDL for the last 4 years, the obvious question is, why have they now pulled the plug? There appear to be several reasons, and I will elaborate on these in an in-depth article about Robinson's move to the Quilliam Foundation, which will be published on our website shortly. But there's really no need to look for deep conspiratorial explanations for the decision to pull out Robinson and try to collapse the EDL. The fact that it's spun out of control and become a threat to its own creators is openly admitted in black and white newsprint. With Tommy being touted round the media studios saying just that, The Independent on the 8th of October, for example, ran the headline, quote, "Tommy Robinson turns his back on his own party over dangers of far-right extremism," unquote. Robinson told the paper that the EDL is, quote, "a catastrophic mess," and said he could, quote, "no longer keep extremist elements within the EDL at bay," unquote. While of course we dispute his characterisation of genuine ethno-nationalism as extremist, Robinson was clearly telling the truth as his handlers see it. Just how much of a mess their scheme to drag patriotic street activism down a warmongering blind alley seems to have dawned on them as the post-Lee Rigby revival of the EDL brought thousands of new activists out onto the streets and highlighted just how little control the Robinson leadership now had. 2 demonstrations in particular hammered the point home. The first was in Newcastle on the 25th of May, immediately after the Greenwich murder. Instead of the couple of hundred Robinson diehards who'd been expected when the event was first announced, more than 2,000 people joined the protest. Although it was nominally backed by Robinson, the vast majority of those present were mobilised by the North East EDL, the Infidels, together with their close comrades from the Scottish Defence League. None of these groups, even then, had anything but contempt for Robinson and Carroll. The writing was on the wall. Robinson's backers got an even bigger shock at the Birmingham rally on the 25th of July. The Birmingham Post reported that the huge crowd not only dwarfed the Muslim-Marxist counter-demo, but more than 2,000 EDL demonstrators kept singing not just "Keep St George in My Heart," but also "There's Only One Nick Griffin." That wasn't in the plot when Frank Gaffney's team first set the whole Robinson operation in motion back in 2009. So Robinson and Carroll and a dozen other players have left the EDL. But because their Zionist puppet masters had told them to, not because they sold out to the Muslims. That is, however, how his apparent U-turn has been perceived by many former followers. As a result, we're now going to see chaotic squabbling within the EDL's ranks, probably combined with frantic jockeying for the leadership of both the EDL and the broader street counter-jihad movement. Some of the more serious-minded people who've been involved, and a number of them are very serious-minded, decent patriots, will now join, or drift into our ranks and our political struggle. Local BNP branches should be going out of their way to find and win over these people, because the path to nationalist political unity runs through the British National Party. As even the BBC acknowledged when reporting Robinson's move, no one else but us is even in the game now. Others will want to stay with the street protests, and I have to say, good luck to them. While it may look a bit rough and ready at times, it's been good to see so many previously non-political people standing up and getting involved for what's right. It will be even better if whatever successor emerges, like a phoenix from the ashes of Frank Gaffney's EDL, is run by Englishmen, and has the courage to stand up for the English folk community and traditional British values, instead of fawning over token Muslims and spotty adolescent homosexuals, and taking orders from a gang of Jewish fascists so extreme that they're even banned from Israel. Whose streets? Our streets. That's the slogan. So the first thing that all those who want to continue the struggle that Robinson has now very visibly betrayed should do is sit down and talk together about how they're going to turn that slogan into reality. Banning the militant gay lobby's rainbow flag and the Zionist Star of David, as well as the swastika, would be a very good place to start.
Thank you, Nick. As usual, you approach from a controversial angle and give us all food for thought. World news. Syria rebels executed civilians, says Human Rights Watch. Rebel forces in Syria killed as many as 190 civilians and seized more than 200 hostages during a military offensive in August, Human Rights Watch says. A report by the US-based group says the deaths occurred in villages inhabited predominantly by members of President Bashar al-Assad's minority Alawite sect near the coastal city of Latakia. It said the findings strongly suggest crimes against humanity were committed. The group has previously documented atrocities by pro-government forces. The report calls on the UN to impose an arms embargo on all groups where there is a credible evidence of their involvement in war crimes. World Today comments, "Let's see how far the UN explores this one then. The reports will be on a postage stamp as it is the rebels being accused." From Egypt, the message is Obama, keep your aid. A US decision to curtail military and economic aid to Egypt to promote democracy may ultimately backfire, pushing Cairo to seek assistance elsewhere and giving Washington less leverage to stabilise a country in the heart of the Middle East. Washington faces a dilemma in dealing with its major regional ally. Egypt controls the Suez Canal and has a peace treaty with neighbouring Israel, but its army overthrew the first freely elected president, Islamist Mohamed Morsi, in July. The United States said on Wednesday it would withhold deliveries of tanks, fighter aircraft, helicopters and missiles to Cairo, as well as $260 million in cash aid to push the army-backed government to steer the nation towards democracy. Egypt's government, the second largest recipient of US aid after Israel, said it would not bow to American pressure. The country's military, which has been leading the crackdown against Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood, can afford to be even more defiant. Thought for the day, our youths and the great cultural divide. Multiculturalism has had the desired effect on at least 3 generations of our children in this country, and none so glaring as the way the latest generations speak. Aided by trashily written magazines for the girls and non-speaking computer games for the boys, where is the example of how to communicate? If these children, or kids as we refer to them nowadays, don't have parents who speak to them at all in English as it was spoke, they will speak in a dialect more suited to the West Indies or some parts of the States than the Queen's English. As for some of this cheap penny dreadful printed crap that wouldn't have passed as toilet paper 20 years ago, some of which has found its way to our local quack surgery, which is where I acquired a little gem of cultural heaven this week, called Pick Me Up at 68p, which is just over the old 5 shillings and is certainly not worth it. It contains all the liberal and diversity-ridden crap that seems to appeal to young girls nowadays, going from "I had my rapist baby," note the rapist was white, through the odd partnership of a couple of oddbods, a girl who looked Filipino who had been born a man but was living as a woman, and a man who was born a woman but was living as a man. And to cap it all, the original woman-man is having babies. Yup, I'm in a muddle with that one as well. What an example to our youth. Cap it with a young woman who works in the West Indies, takes in an exotic stranger and is of course strangled. To finish off the select fashion supplement showing the ideal outfit for our youth, a scrawny girl in very short shorts, boots and a jacket. I must have one now, the shorts that is, not the girl. My point being, the dumbing down of generations is culminating in a strange outcrop of beings who sound worse than they look, if possible. I took a sojourn in Farnham for coffee this week, and it being the last of the really hot sunny days, we sat outside. Oh, the luxury. Unfortunately, the blissful silence was broken by a group of what I believe were uni students, and what a bunch they were. They would have gladdened the hearts of the UAF and now the EDL to no end. We had a black guy of indeterminate sexual gender who was speaking in patois speak with almost a lisp, and 3 girls, one of whom was loudly unintelligible with a heavy UK regional accent, another who sounded like a cheerleader but didn't have the looks or the US vowels, and the remaining one who shouted for the home counties, but still with the like before and after every word. After a barrage of around 20 minutes of this prattling they left and the world went quiet. Now we know to avoid any town anywhere that boasts a second-rate college laughingly called uni, because they are the cultural feeding grounds of diversity and the school of common purpose. My youngest went to Farnham, or University of Surrey as it's called, and it was the most miserable time of his life, and he left after a year, but since then it has obviously got worse. My point being, if so-called students are speaking in lingua franca, what hope is there for the ones stuck on sink estates or on the outskirts of heavily enriched enclaves? None, but that doesn't worry the establishment or the government, because the vast bulk of MPs and even the less rated officials send their children to private education, as indeed for a time I was able to. It wasn't for the snob appeal, it was to give them a work ethic in life and a chance. But looking at the present education system and the intakes of ethnic pupils in many areas of the UK, it's easy to see why being white and cultured is not a thing for our middle or lower class youth to aspire to anymore. In the dumbing down, the establishment have not only taken away any form of self-pride from the lower class children, but have encroached on middle class families as well, and now most are speaking like Ali G on a bad day and all are shouting. The trend for this is starting with children as young as 10, and believe me, the way a 10-year-old speaks will stick with them the rest of their lives. Even when hopefully all this mixed dialogue is old-fashioned, they will still speak like a person from the third world or worse. And why? 2 reasons. One is the English way of speaking is not being promoted in the average comprehensive because few of the teachers and even less of the pupils speak Queen's English themselves, either at school or in their homes. Secondly, if the youngster is white, he or she will not get the help that is offered from so many groups to black, Asian and other children of colour to make their way in the world. The young white adult, mainly male, will be depressed further and will be unemployable in the Britain of the future. Unless of course we all end up multicoloured and multi-speaking, which although a Labour Marxist dream, simply will not happen. And even if it does, they will still need to be able to communicate with each other. In the ITV programme on regional accents it was hilarious. They didn't take into account the awful Jamaican speak, but concentrated on English accents. One taxi driver blamed the bias against the Liverpudlian accent as because of the Hillsborough disaster, and I nearly fell off the sofa. No matey, it's because the Liverpudlian wine is frankly bloody awful to listen to and always has been. No offence to our Liverpool listeners, but I am a Londoner, so put it down to that. I'm worried because as a race we are aborting thousands of white babies, yet being encouraged to give birth to challenged babies. And our young women are not encouraged to marry and have children at all, and not all the blame lies with them. They are constantly told they will have no jobs, no money, no husbands and no future, because they are not of an ethnic minority that does have differing standards of life for their children, and they believe it. So we have at least 2 generations consisting mainly of feckless, badly spoken, illiterate, drunken, drugged youths who don't want to be English at all. They want to be what is popular, and that is black or brown, and that is why they're opting for the easy way out. Not standing up for themselves or their country, many just seem to fade away into the crowds, don't they? So thanks to the media and TV, white is out and black is in, because of course propaganda tells them this. It's all on the television and the press. Mixed race partnerships, mixed sex partnerships, mixed race babies, fake tans, tattoos out of the wazoo and sometimes up the wazoo, and an ugly form of speaking that makes the average Brit want to slap 'em upside the head. Or be a Dalek and exterminate. I'm wearing my Davros hat today, obviously. This is what massive immigration has done together with the very clever think tanks and media. The people who used to call it a plot against Britain were laughed at 50 years ago, but no longer. They, Enoch and Winston, were right. It is a plot and it massacred millions in its name, and it's called Marxism, alive and well in England today. Where else could a leafy suburb previously known as Kingston-on-Thames be renamed unofficially Kingston, Jamaica? Only here, but hopefully not for long. And finally, a fond remembrance, or the eternal flame. 2 women friends had gone out for a girls' night out. Both were very faithful and loving wives. However, they had gotten over-enthusiastic on the Bacardi breezers. Incredibly drunk and walking home, they needed to pee, so they stopped in the cemetery. One of them had nothing to wipe with, so she thought she'd take off her panties and use them. Her friend, however, was wearing a rather expensive pair of panties and didn't want to ruin them. She was lucky enough to squat down next to a grave that had a wreath with a ribbon on it, so she proceeded to wipe with that. After the girls did their business, they proceeded to go home. The next day, one of the women's husbands was concerned that his normally sweet and innocent wife was still in bed, hung over, so he phoned the other husband and said, These girl nights have to stop. I'm starting to suspect the worst. My wife came home with no panties. That's nothing, said the other husband. Mine came home with a card stuck to her behind that said, "From all of us at the fire station, we'll never forget you." You've been listening to The World at 8. Don't forget it is the first day of the Euro Election 2014 fundraiser tour, starting Saturday in the evening in the South West region and Sunday lunchtime in the South East. Nick Griffin MEP is the guest speaker. I'm Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.